and welcome to another segment of Open House here at Community Media. I'm Raymond Galker. I'll be your host. We have a very special program for you today. We have a public historian by the name of Kenneth A. Gavin with us. Ken?
Raymond, pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me on.
Every time before we do a show, I get a chance to sit down, I get to talk to people, and I just asked Ken if there was a message that you like people to leave with, what would it be? And can you share that with us?
Sure, I'd be happy to. For me, as a public historian, what we do is we make connections to the general public about history. Why is history important? And for me, it's very, very basic fundamentals. History is always all about the people. It's about the stories of the people that we're telling as historians. So it's definitely about the people of the past. And there's something sacred about that, right? Because you are working through their life. And 250 years from now, if somebody were to tell our stories, our life stories, we'd want it to be done right. We'd want it to be accurate. So the facts are important. But it's not just about the people of the past, Ray. It's about the people we're seeking to educate. I've done a lot of tours over the years at Valley Forge. This is my 19th season as a tour guide there part-time. And inevitably, with some of our groups, you'll get folks who are there because they love the history, they love the content, they want to see the place and learn it, but they may have kids or a partner with them who's there for the promise of lunch afterwards, and they're not totally invested. And for me, reaching those people is very important. And it's a matter of how do you do that? And you make connections over time. If you can tell the story, and you can tell it well, and you can tell it in a factually accurate way, but you help those individuals who are on the periphery make connections. When they see people from the past working through challenges in their lives, in their smaller communities, in the context of a broader society, and they realize that person looks like me, or that person is the same age as me, or I've had a similar problem I've encountered in my life. Now you've got them hooked, and they have an investment in the historical record, in the story you're trying to tell. So for me, if folks remember one thing when they look at the study of history, it's always all about the people. And I think in a lot of ways too, that shows us the importance of local history or micro history and how that connects to the macro scale, because just as individuals may go, oh, I'm not really interested in that. You may have folks who live in a smaller local community. They look at an event like the American Revolution and go, well, my community didn't really have a role. Or there's no way that was important to my community. Yes, it is. When you start to dig into those stories, you find the folks who lived through that time period, how they responded to challenges, and what the connection is to things that are happening on the macro level.
How they were the same as us.
Exactly.
Or how we were the same as them.
Yeah.
So, I'd love to get straight to this conversation,
Sure.
But, Kevin, I was preparing for our interview, and this is all on you. It's the front and the back. Before I go over some of this, when did you find out that you had an interest for history?
It's something that has always been with me. From as far back as I can remember as a kid, I have loved history, specifically American history and the American Revolutionary and Civil War time periods. For some reason, they spoke to me. Some of my earliest memories as a young kid are going to Valley Forge. I grew up about 10 minutes away from there. And my mom is a school teacher, still teaches to this day. And I remember being pulled around the pathways there in this little red wooden radio flyer wagon.
Oh.
And my mom reading the wayside markers to me before I could even read. And that turned into sort of a weekly Sunday pilgrimage. It's what we did. We went to church in the morning, went to Valley Forge, walked around the paths, and then maybe went and did shopping or whatever chores the family had to do before we came home for dinner. And she noticed in me at that young age that there was a spark there, that this was something that really interested me. And she encouraged that. And I'm so glad that she did, because I'm at a point in my life now where I've done a lot to help educate the public about our history. And that all goes back to my mom and those early moments in time, for sure.
And at this point, you're like 3-4 years old?
Yeah, it was 3 or 4, probably my first trip out there.
And you knew every Sunday you were going to get pulled on that red wagon.
Yep.
That must have been awesome.
It was my Disney World. As a young kid, it was my Disney World, and the place has had such an impact on my life. Valley Forge is central to so much of what I ended up doing with history. I have to tell you a story because I think it's a good one. So I remember being 8 or 9 years old, and it was cold. It was February, celebration of Washington's birthday. So we went to Valley Forge for the party, and we went into one of the huts at the Muhlenberg Brigade, and there were 2 Park Service Rangers in there dressed in 18th century clothes. One was a chaplain, and the other one was portraying a common soldier. Had a long talk with me, and before I left, they gave me these little toy lead soldiers. Fast forward several years later, I am now working part-time as a guide at the park and volunteering with their living history programs. And one of the rangers who had recently retired said to me, why do you do this? He said, why do you come out here on these bitter nights and do this reenacting thing, this living history stuff? And I said, you know, Bill, and I recounted this story, and his jaw hit the floor. And I said, are you okay? And he said, just wait a minute. And he called over another ranger who had recently retired back to volunteer named George. And he said, I want you to tell George what you just told me about what happened when you were a kid here. And I told George the story. Now, George is dumbstruck. And I said, what is wrong with you two? What's going on tonight? And he looked at me and said, that was us. He said, that was us. He said, we were the only 2 who did that. If there was a young person who was very interested, we gave them those little tokens. So, you know, they're on my desk at work to this day. And it shows that continuity. It shows the impact that you have when you do this kind of work. And it's always been a really powerful story to me.
Now, so at this point, you're 8 or 9 years old.
Yeah.
And this is your first experience with living history or living reenactors?
I had seen living history at the park before, but as a really young kid, you know, when you're 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, you sort of stand there in awe of these guys, like, whoa, they are coming out of the past. And as a very young person, part of the hook for me was it made the history tangible. Now, I knew they weren't really time travelers, of course. You know, you could put 2 and 2 together, but there was somebody there who made it tactile. And again, it goes back to history being about the people, right? So now here was this person representing someone from a long time ago, representing the soldiers who were at the encampment itself. But by the time I was 8 or 9, I think I worked up the courage to finally have a conversation with these guys and sit there and talk about things. And I couldn't tell you what I asked them. But looking back on it now at my age, the fact that they took a half an hour to answer every question I had and made me the sole focus of their world at a very busy time, it still speaks to my heart. And it's what I want to provide.
And you could just imagine what happened to their hearts when they found out that you were one of the individuals that they gave those images to, those little soldiers.
Yeah. I had joked with him, I said I was going to get a T-shirt that says, I do living history because of Bill Trotman. And we laugh about that to this day, because even though Bill is retired, he and I still work together on a number of projects.
Yes, and number of projects. Now we're coming back to this. All right. So you got involved at this about 3 years old because of your mom. And as a result, you got into living history. Can you speak on that for a second?
Sure. There's a lot of ways that we could go with living history and what it is. I definitely wanted to do it because I thought it would be fun, right? As a young person, I think, you know, the reasons you do anything in life can evolve over time. The longer you stay with them, as you mature as an individual, as you're better formed over time. When I was a kid, I thought it's just, wow, that would be fun to wear the soldier clothes and do what these guys are doing. When I actually got around to doing living history, I was in my early 20s, and you know, it was a bit more of a refined reason at that point. I wanted to utilize it as a tool to educate, right? To show people things of the past, to have experiential archaeology moments for myself as well. I think there really is something about seeing living history when it's done and done well. And it's like any other craft, when it's done poorly, it's evident. And it has no nutritional educational value. But when it's done right, when it's done in a thoughtful way, when it's done in a curated way, and you're producing a program for the general public where they can get a glimpse through the window, right? And it's never going to be perfect. You can't really transport them back in time. We don't want to do that. But you want to give them a glimpse into the past. They can sort of take away the smudge on the window, look through and see, that's a little bit about what it was like there. It's a learning tool. Some people are visual learners. Some people learn by reading. Some people enjoy lectures. But some people need to have those moments in time where they can look at history almost as edutainment in the best sense of the word. And I think one of the things when we do military history specifically, and we do living history programs, what I've tried to do over the years with my groups is to expand the base. Because I think what most people expect to see is we're going to go see military reenactors do some drill, maybe fire some muskets, or there will be sort of a tactical reenactment of a battle. All of that has its place, and all of that is very important. But what about the other 98% of the time that the Army has to fill when they're not doing those things? So we've looked into the roles of women in the Continental Army, and we have women who are members of our group who will portray camp followers, who will portray nurses. What about the story of the civilians? How civilian interplay acts with the Army? What about military justice and law? So we've done programs on courts martial that are first-person living history programs, and ones in which we try to immerse the audience to a degree in that too. So there are elements that are totally demonstrative. There are elements that are a little more immersive to the extent the public wants to be immersed in the programming itself in a safe fashion. But in the end, it really is about looking at how do I use living history to tell a story that is documented, to tell that story well in a way that it educates, entertains, and makes the general public leave wanting to see us more and to learn more. That's the goal.
But it also comes back to creating an emotional connection.
Yes.
An awareness of the decisions a person had to make and why they might have made it. When did you start living history? What age?
I was in my early 20s.
Now you're 20s. Okay. So you kept on going back to Valley Forge, right? You know, you're 8, 9, you're going back there. Your mom's still taking you there?
And at some point, just going on my own. You know.
Sometimes going on your own.
Yeah.
You're going to school, high school, and that. History, your favorite subject?
Yep, absolutely.
Did you ever do a living history for an assignment?
No, I never did living history for an assignment. The closest we got to that was, I remember a paper that I had to do in an 8th grade history course about the American Revolution. I actually brought in a park ranger from Valley Forge as part of that, so that what we did was I had a conversation, and it was sort of he did first-person history, so I interviewed him as a modern student in 1993, so you know, you figured out how old I am if you've done the math, when I was in 8th grade, but he was speaking to me as if he were living through the encampment of 1777, 1778. So history had always been my favorite subject. Went through high school, was busy working weekends. College was school and work. And so I really didn't get involved in living history until after I had graduated from college. And actually started with Civil War, because I have a love for the 19th century time period as well. And a buddy of mine who I had done Civil War with for a long time said, you know, you love Rev War, why don't you come and do it? So I did. And, you know, then the rest was sort of history on that front. But when you say getting people to understand the individuals of the past and looking at their experiences and making connections, when I talk about a curated living history program, that's exactly what I mean. Just last summer, Spencer's Additional Continental Regiment, that's my group, we worked in conjunction with Adams County Historical Society on the 250th anniversary of Michael Doodle recruiting riflemen in York County. And we used the Dobbin House as a backdrop. We did that program as first person. And it was almost like a living history flash mob. The public knew they were going to see something. They didn't know everything they were going to see. So then we had people from the local community, as we gave this recruiting stump speech, begin to talk about what their motivations might be to serve, or what some of their hesitations might be, wanting to know why they should sign up, why they should serve in the Continental Army. The courts martial program that we do are always documented cases from the American Revolution where you can pull the thread. And it's not just the men, Women with the Army are also subject to martial law, face courts martial on a regular basis. So when we do the courts martial programs, we explain to the public, you'll see a first-person program here. This is what it's going to be. We also tell them, after you hear everything, we're going to ask for your help. If you were an officer sitting on this military tribunal based on all the evidences and testimony you've heard, what would your verdict be? And then after we poll the room and we have some very substantive discussions about what's going on, we let folks know what actually happened to this individual in the 18th century. And it does really give you moments for very rich dialogue with individuals who are trying to understand why someone might be motivated to desert, why somebody might be motivated to steal, why they might be motivated to have other infractions of the rules. And those have been some of my favorite programs, because you don't walk away guessing what the public got out of it. You see firsthand what they got out of it. But that's doing it well.
You're inviting them to become immersed.
Yes, and to the degree they want, right? So we never want to do a program where people feel uncomfortable. They could just have a simple show of hands about the verdict, and maybe that's the level of involvement that somebody may want. But for those other individuals who want to have the discussions about the motivations and about the people, everybody in the room, even if they are more introverted, will benefit from that guided dialogue with the extroverts who are out there in the general public.
So what were some of the reasons that people voiced for wanting to become part of the militia, or not wanting to become part of the militia?
It's a great question, and I think it's a complicated one regionally. If you were to look in the Philadelphia area in 1775 and motivations for some of those individuals who support the patriot cause, William Allen is a great example. He becomes a captain in a Pennsylvania regiment. He's from Philadelphia, one of the wealthiest families in the province. But when independence is declared, William Allen says, "No, I am done." And he goes and commands a loyalist battalion after that. When you look at the wealthy elites, or the more Eastern families who are upper middle class to elite, I really believe in my heart that they look at the American Revolution as an extension of the English Civil War. And the English Civil War guarantees that the landed gentry will have certain rights and freedoms that cannot be trampled by the crown. The elites, looking at things like rising levels of taxation in the 1760s and the manner in which those taxes are imposed by the crown, are raising red flags and saying, whoa, 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 we fought an English Civil War over this. We're a different kind of monarchy here in the British Empire, right? We are not absolute monarchy like France or Spain. This is not despotism like Russia. This is not the Germanic states. We're Englishmen, and our rights are being trampled. When you come to the frontier, right, if we're looking at south central Pennsylvania, of course, York County is broadly encompassing what we know as York, Adams, and Cumberland today, when it's established in 1750 out of Lancaster County. There's a much different demographic here. Of course, you're going to see a lot of Scots-Irish immigration that's populating this area in the mid-18th century and moving as we get into the 1760s and 1770s. You're going to see influxes of Germanic immigration as well. These people are markedly different than the landed Anglos that have been in the large cities or closer to the large cities. They have left Europe for a reason. The Scots-Irish have been oppressed. The Scots-Irish have been treated as serfs, which is why they have left Ireland, which is why they have left Scotland. They're coming here looking for opportunity. For the Germans that come here, they are experiencing, many of them, rank poverty in the Germanic states and are seeking new opportunity here. So when those individuals see in the 1760s and 1770s this ratcheting up by the British Crown and sort of the cracking down on the American colonies here, red flags are going off for them for different reasons, because they're seeing oppression that they fled from now taking root in this new world. So for the Scots-Irish that are out here, you'll see a lot less people who are going to be switching sides, right? But back in the Philadelphia region, specifically early in the war, the motivations are different. And I think motivations for enlistment can change over time. If you look at 1775, there is a rage militaire, if you would want to call it that, where those who are inclined to patriot service are going to volunteer and volunteer quickly. But as a long war progresses, it becomes harder and harder to fill the ranks of continental units because the reality of warfare and the brutality of warfare has set in by that point in time. So there is more of a philosophical, noble approach to the early volunteers as opposed to some of the later ones when you get into things like drafts, conscripts, that sort of business. And that's, of course, in a very broad brush. But I do think, regardless, if you look at the reasons that people feel it is important to fight against the crown for preservation of rights, what they see as those rights or what they see as their expected freedoms are very different depending on who that person is and what their life experience has been.
So the Scottish,
Mm-hmm.
they came here for opportunity, for a chance to have land.
Mm-hmm. Chance to have land and a chance to be away from oppression. Right? And both of those things are possible here in the New World in the 18th century. There is a lot of land that's present in Pennsylvania and up for grabs. It's a short social ladder to climb, but it's a very shaky one too. It's a social ladder that rewards ingenuity. It's a social ladder that rewards competence. And it's a social ladder that is a little bit easier to climb the further west you go because you are building community. And if the majority of the community is Scots-Irish, when these communities migrate, they tend to be somewhat insular. You will gravitate towards people who you understand linguistically, culturally, religiously when they form community. Not that they don't have their own differences and their own problems. However, they are building community on the frontier, and they're doing it very well.
Well, we do the same now.
We do.
We gravitate towards people who are similar to us, have the same values, have the same goals.
People enjoy a comfort zone. And I think one of the other motivating factors for service that can't be ignored is in the aftermath of the French and Indian War. Right now, when I look at the 18th century in North America, I think the most critical thing that happens is British victory in 1763. In that French and Indian War, globally call it the 7 Years' War, because that's a watershed moment there. Other wars that take place in the 18th century, North America is a sideshow, right? If we're looking at the Austrian succession, the Spanish succession, those are major European conflicts that rarely touch North America in any way. There are certainly conflicts with natives throughout the 17th and 18th century, but North America is the prize that Britain and France are fighting for in this French and Indian War. Because Britain is banking on making North America the keystone of empirical economic success for the empire in the entire Western Hemisphere, just like they're going to count on India in the East. So for any British colonists who are here, regardless of their background, they see this moment in time as one where the French have been driven away. The Ohio River Valley should be open for settlement. The Spanish have been driven away. Ostensibly, they believe natives are going to be pushed very far west and that they're going to be able to go as far as they want to go. But almost immediately,
They're held back.
they're held back. In addition to the taxation issues, when Britain has the proclamation of 1763, they're hemming people in on the eastern side of the Appalachians and saying, no, you can't go there. When you get to 1774, what we call the coercive or intolerable acts, a lot of people focus on the shuttering of the port of Boston, and rightfully so. That is a coalescing moment for colonists everywhere to say, if this can happen in Boston, it can happen anywhere else. But the Quebec Act of 1774 does things like reinstate French civil law in private matters in Quebec, which is now English, right? Because we get Canada and we get East and West Florida as a result of the French and Indian War, right? They are now part of the British Empire. So our former enemy, the French, we're now going to reinstate civil law for them. They're going to allow the free practice of Catholicism. They're going to allow the French to populate the Ohio River Valley freely, French Canadians. When colonists see those, and for the French to be able to fish off the New England coast, when colonists see that, they don't understand it. What has happened? This was our mortal enemy that we fought over for many years, and now, why did we fight the war?
They got,
right?
You didn't win.
Yeah, it almost feels like a bait and switch, particularly to the people who have westward ambitions. And I think we should be really clear that it's not just the poor or the middling Scotch-Irish or Germanic immigrants who are seeking to go west. The elites, such as a George Washington, have a vested interest in all of these lands to the west. Benjamin Franklin has a vested interest in all of these lands to the west because they see an opportunity to invest in millions of acres of land that can be sold to individuals who are seeking to create farms out there.
Real estate agents.
Basically, real estate agents or real estate speculators. We could even use that word too. But see, what Britain does with its policies in the 1760s is it manages to set the stage for rebellion because they anger and affect in a negative fashion, economically, politically, and socially, every stratosphere of colonial American society, from the elites all the way down. And if you're going to have a rebellion movement, all of these different types of people have to be able to coalesce around something. And they have to be friends just long enough to affect social or political change. And Britain certainly sets the stage for that with its policies in the 1760s and 1770s.
So the elites, the majority of them are Philadelphia.
And if you're looking at Pennsylvania specifically, the majority of the elites are in Philadelphia. And there's certainly a mistrust between what's happening in Philadelphia and what's happening on the frontier or components of society that are becoming less the frontier and more populated over time. Because those individuals in the frontier or frontier-esque communities have a mistrust of government in Philadelphia. And by the time you get to the mid-1770s, the Penn family is trying to hold together an extremely shaky political coalition in order to maintain power. You know, and you have to think about the fact, too, that William Penn, while his ideals are very noble, the founding of Pennsylvania as a place where there's going to be, if not religious freedom, tolerance of religious practice, pacifism, the Penns are still getting very wealthy off of what's happening here, because if you're going to settle in Pennsylvania, you're buying land from the Penn family. It's a proprietary colony. And then even after you buy that land, you're going to pay quit rents on an annual basis, which is the equivalency of a property tax, but you get no civil service for it. So the pockets of the Penn family are being consistently lined. You know, people see that. People know that. And the interests of a Philadelphia merchant or a Philadelphia businessman of another sort are markedly different than the interests of Scots-Irish or Germanic individuals out here on the frontier, but they see a lack of representation. So when you move towards rebellion, and then in 1775, when the Penns crumble, and by 1776, Pennsylvania inaugurates a new state constitution because they have to, that power vacuum is then filled with radicals who are supportive of the revolution. The Penns are a vestige of the past. The Penns are a vestige of the royal authority in a way. But when you have a power vacuum that happens, people who feel underrepresented or misrepresented are going to take advantage of that vacuum.
They still had their land that they were selling.
The Penns did up until the Penn government is no longer functional.
Okay.
Right.
Then who got that land?
Well, if you're a landowner, you're a landowner at that point.
Okay.
Okay. You're not paying quit rents to the Penn family anymore after that point in time. But it's one of those instances of maybe be careful what you wish for. Because Pennsylvania's state government in 1776 is probably the most radical of the new 13 states. And they want individuals to do things like sign loyalty oaths to the cause. Not everybody wants to do that. Some people will be conscientious objectors to that. And if you don't sign a loyalty oath, then you could face confiscation of your weapons, confiscation of property, inability to vote, inability to serve as a juror, and you have neighbors in the Committee of Safety who are constantly watching you. And in what is now Adams County, there are over 400 individuals who refuse to sign loyalty oaths when the new state government comes into power in 1776 and starts requiring those things. And those stories are nuanced ones, but I think they're interesting to point out that history and even the experience of the rebellion, which graduates into a revolution, is not as black and white as most people would think. And I think it's okay and valuable to explore those nuances and to see what those challenges are. And I don't say that in a way that I would want to denigrate the revolution. That's certainly not what I would advocate for. But I think it's important for us to look at the blemishes. I think it's important for us to look at the black marks that happened during that period. Because you could certainly look at the American Revolution as an experience in extreme political violence. And it was in many instances. You know, if you look at tarring and featherings of British tax collectors, things like that, it's very brutal. I think we should look at that, and I think we should appreciate that. And it helps us to avoid the pitfall of nostalgia, because I think nostalgia can be a good thing. I think pride in our heritage is a good thing, but I think we have to know the whole context. Because if we fall into that trap of nostalgia, we get sort of a saccharine veneered version of history that doesn't do justice to the actual facts that are out there, and then that means that stories get lost.
We want to remember the good days,
Yeah.
but those good days might not be the way we think they were.
I think all of us yearn for the good old days, but the good old days probably never existed.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There were challenges in every day and age where people, I think, would look back and say, geez, I wish it was like it was 20 or 30 years ago. I mean, even, you know, in the modern context of 2026, when society faces so many challenges, you know, at home in the United States and globally, I've had some people look at me and say, man, wasn't it better in the 90s? And I said, well, are you sure? Because there was a lot going on in the 90s too, at home and abroad, that was really challenging for us at that point in time. I think people want to feel good about the past and be able to have an escape sometimes. But there's certainly nothing simpler about the 18th century. You know, if people have said to me, wouldn't you want to go back in time? And I'd say, I really appreciate modern dentistry.
Right.
And right, you know,
Right.
so.
And social media has changed everything. If social media was there during the Vietnam War, if social media was there during the Vietnam War, which media was and made a big difference in everything, the settlers in this area, they were a unique type of group, were they not? They were very patriotic. Were they not some of the first that came forward and enlisted?
I think it's a really unique group. I think this blend of Scotch, Irish, and German is uniquely primed to rebel because of their experience that they've had, whether it was in the Germanic states, whether it was in Scotland, whether it was in Ireland. These are people who have experienced oppression brutally firsthand, and oppression in a number of ways, politically, economically, socially, right? So they are uniquely primed in that way. They are also some of the first to enlist in the Continental Army. I believe that in Doodle's Rifle Company, the commissions that he has along with his lieutenants are some of the first that Congress signs off on after Washington's. And the fact that they are hearing news of Boston, this community is extremely supportive. I mean, they're gathering at Samuel Geddes' tavern out by the Marsh Creek settlement, and they're voting to send a sum of 250 pounds sterling to the relief of the women and children of Boston in 1774. 1775, news of Lexington and Concord. Michael Doodle is recruiting, and he's doing it in the spring. Those guys go to a church service on July the 1st, and I think within 24 or 25 days, Doodle has his rifle company up in Boston, and which is remarkable. If you're walking to Boston from South Central Pennsylvania and doing it in 24 days.
And then getting engaged.
And then getting engaged. And not only getting engaged, but as soon as Doodle got there, he was maybe pushing it a little bit with Washington, but talking about ways that, hey, maybe we can hit some of these British troop transports out there in the harbor. Mm-hmm. They were ready to go. And interestingly, with a lot of those men, early war is a one-year enlistment period. 75, 76, if you're enlisting in the Continental Army, it's a one-year period of service. A lot of guys go home. The men who are coming from this area, many of them don't go home after the enlistments are over. They keep re-upping. And even for those who will come back home after they finish their enlistments, and James Geddes is a good example of that. James Geddes is at the Battle of New York, is most likely taken prisoner of war, will eventually come back home, but then he signs on in a dragoon unit in 1780, I believe. 1780, 81, he is in a dragoon unit because everybody's wondering, will the war come west? Will it come to this area? Anthony Wayne comes through this area and goes down through Littlestown on his way to Virginia in 1781. So while warfare itself never touches directly with combat in this region, there's always a concern that it may. And it's a concern that bubbles all the way up to Washington. When Washington is looking at the fall of Philadelphia in 1777, and Congress has evacuated first to Lancaster, then wanting to get the Susquehanna between them and the enemy, and goes to what is called Yorktown in the 18th century. They go to York to sit. Washington considers moving west to shadow them for two reasons. They're a political target, and if they are captured, it might end the war in a way that is not favorable for the Patriot cause. Washington also looks at the economic value of Chester, Lancaster, and York counties as we move east to west, because this is the breadbasket of the Revolutionary cause. Absolutely. There are some estimates that there is enough grain being produced in those three counties to make bread for 250,000 people a year. That's an outstanding amount of grain, right?
Plus, the families are being affected when their sons and husbands are away at war.
It's an immeasurable effect. And if you speak to, if I'm doing tours for military families, they grasp this much easier.
They understand.
They understand this. When you talk to individuals who have had a spouse or a parent deployed for a year, several months, any period of time, the first thing that they want to talk about, usually to the side, is what life is like when that person is not home. There's an economic burden, there's a household repair burden, there is a parenting burden, there is a burden of worry every single day.
Especially when you're in the frontier.
Yeah, especially on the frontier, which lends to tight-knit community in many ways. And I do think that is, and this is a little bit more conjectural on my part, Ray, and when I do that, I'll tell you, I promise. But my feeling is those tight-knit Scotch, Irish, and Germanic communities, when they experience warfare, also have the ability to rely on each other and to help each other through those difficulties and through those hard times. And that concept of community is not one we always have today. It's a little different. When you talked about social media, one of the things that's really interesting to me about social media is how there's positives and negatives to it. I think in terms of amplifying a message or sharing a message, wow, it's a really powerful tool that could reach lots of people at once. I think it has detracted from our ability to think critically and reasonably. Because you get perhaps very difficult news or information about a complicated scenario through a lens that may not always be qualified, right? I think you could make a case that over the centuries, any type of media, whether it be the first newspapers or TV news, that there is a degree of political bias one way or another. But if it comes from a position that is reasoned and a position that is well educated on a topic, or it comes in a manner that presents two very valid sides to an argument, that's okay. The problem lies with information being digested as gospel truth that is either intentionally or unintentionally misinformation because it's coming from a poorly educated source.
And back then you had pamphlets.
Yes, you did.
And newspapers.
You had pamphlets.
And the pamphlets weren't always.
Oh no, you had propaganda for sure. And Revere is one of the best propagandists out there. When we see the engraving of the Boston Massacre, that's 18th century propaganda at its best. Many American colonists are petrified of the Germanic auxiliaries that are coming over here because they're being told that they will eat babies. But at the same token, when the Germanic troops are being shipped off to America, they are being told that the Americans will show no quarter to you, that they will hide behind every tree, and that if you attempt to surrender in a military engagement, you will be executed summarily. So the fact that the elites, whether it be a political, economic, military elite, is trying to condition individuals or condition a portion of society to act a certain way is certainly nothing new.
The interesting part, Ken, that I see also is the growth. You have the frontier, and that's what I like about this project with New Oxford Historic Society, is trying to realize here that where we're sitting was a forest. You know, our square was a crossroads because of an Indian path.
Yeah.
But then you had individuals come in, and then you had, which were probably traders, and then you had more individuals come in, which were probably people looking for land and opportunity. And then you had different people coming in to service the people who were there.
Yeah, of course.
You had people of trades.
This is, when I think about South Central Pennsylvania in the 18th century, I envision a burgeoning gateway to the West and the South, because that's precisely what this is. What happens when we hit the Susquehanna River? You know, John Harris applies to run a ferry, which may not be a ferry that we would think in a very sophisticated sense, but it's a trading post, and he's running boats back and forth across the Susquehanna. You know, and then John Wright is going to do the same thing. So they're giving people the opportunity to move further west. They're expanding on the road networks that have come first through Philadelphia to Chester to Lancaster to York, and they're moving out there. And after you get the people to those locations, yes, then you build community with other folks who have different professions. You know, I was looking at this area roughly, and sort of New Oxford today out to Marsh Creek, and if we looked at what are listed as professions, at least in the 1790 census, which gives us a fairly good idea of what's happening here in the latter portion of the 18th century. Certainly farmers are among the chief profession, that's number one, but you're going to see the presence of tanners, hatters, millers, cordwainers, all at blacksmiths, whitesmiths. You see all of these individuals who have professions that help build and support community and give community members the things they need to live their daily lives. So it's not that it's some backwater where everything has to be imported. In the mid-18th century onward, you're seeing those things that are being produced here locally in this region to support a community that's stabilizing, and you know, the presence of taverns, right, as well. At least 7 taverns in Cumberland and Straben townships in 1775. That number doubles to 14 by 1783. Those are licensed taverns, which means that there are probably about 20 or so taverns, because tippling houses are out there, and tippling houses are taverns operating without licenses. To have that concentration of taverns tells me there's a lot of traffic, because the actual population of York County in the 18th century in this region wouldn't support 14 taverns. These people would be out of business. So it tells you that back and forth trade, because the taverns are local community centers where you may go to get a meal and to meet somebody and have social time, but you're also getting news there, you're getting mail there. But the people moving along the road networks are utilizing those on a regular basis. And this is central hub for what is the Great Wagon Road, because you're moving out over the mountains, then down south. There is a gateway to Winchester by 1754. Those roads have been open, Black's Gap, Nichols Gap, moving through those areas, all of that by the late 1740s, early 1750s, moving west. And then if you're looking at the York-Monocacy Road, that's there, I believe, in the 1740s. So you have the cross traffic. Mm-hmm. By the time you get to 1770, there are several farm families and millers in York County who are petitioning for road network expansion to the south to Baltimore. Because if you are a farmer or a miller producing grain, Baltimore is a more reliable port than Philadelphia. You're not dealing with crossing the Susquehanna over, to try to get your grain out there. It's a shorter trip. It's easier to do. And when I talk to people about that, I also like to say, there's a reason that if you're into sports, there's a reason you're a Ravens or an Orioles fan here, because you've had an economic and a social connection to Baltimore for centuries. And most people don't realize that until you put it in those terms, but then it all clicks, it all makes sense. And to have the Monocacy watershed here and basically, hydrating this entire area for the farming communities, it makes it ripe for a place where people want to go. You have what you need. You have the basic needs, you build on those needs, and this does become a burgeoning community. And I think I refer to it as frontier-esque because I see it as constantly developing over the course of the 18th century.
Beautiful. It's a beautiful place to live.
It is.
I mean, we have access to the mountains. We call them mountains, here, but they're, we have flat land. We have just beautiful, beautiful land. Do you ever sit around and you're looking at people and say, that person reminds me of what a blacksmith would have been back in the 1700s? Do you ever find yourself, I mean, as a living historian and
It's a good question.
That person reminds me of.
Well, I know people who do blacksmithing in an 18th century way too, but I think you do from time to time, and it could be a physical characteristic of somebody who has forearms that are just like Popeye because you're swinging that hammer all day long. Where you see a physical characteristic where somebody might fit into a certain trade, or whether someone conducts themselves in a manner or has a way of speaking that like they would have fit into the northern neck of Virginia, or this is somebody who may have been a Scots-Irish immigrant who's here working on the frontier. I think when you love history, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but when you love history in a certain way, it's always with you. And you can't help but finding lots of things in your modern world that you begin correlating back into your brain. And I'm always looking for ways to tell the story and looking for angles that I may have missed, whether it's at a macro level or whether I'm in a micro community, or ways to make connections between historical time periods. One of the things that I think that in this region of Pennsylvania, the Civil War story, which is so incredibly important, and I love that story so much, often overshadows other time periods. But you can start to tell stories about the American Civil War in ways that show connective threads, either forwards or backwards in time, and make those connections for people. An example of which would be a woman named Anna Morris Holstein. And Anna Holstein was a nurse, and she was attached to the Second Army Corps in the Army of the Potomac. When Camp Letterman is formed in the aftermath of the Battle of Gettysburg, she becomes the matron. So she's the head nurse of this hospital. She goes home to Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, and is the driving force behind the preservation of Washington's headquarters at Valley Forge. She is the reason that it eventually becomes a state and then a national park, because you have her leading these preservation efforts. So when you can tell stories like that, or show what a Robert E. Lee's father did during the American Revolution, because of course his father is Light Horse Harry Lee, then you show the connective threads over time. And for me, it's more than fun trivia, right? Because, and I just had a scout group the other day and we talked about this with them. When you make the connective threads, you hope the ultimate thing you end up showing them, in addition to helping them learn something, is you have a place. The thread connects to you in this day and age. And when you are confronted with challenges in your lives and your society, now you, as somebody who understands history better, can look to the past for examples of how did other folks respond? And were those some good choices or were they some bad choices when they responded to things? I don't think history repeats itself, but I think it certainly reverberates, right? And we can pick up on the tone of those reverberations and then use our knowledge, and it can shape the decisions that we make.
Those reverberations more or less come to light with what everybody has to deal with in life. I mean, in the 1700s, people were trying to be independent, trying to be free. That's why they came here, the Scottish, the Germans. Um, Correct?
I think they're looking to experience freedom. Freedom and liberty are not synonymous in the 18th century. And I think it's important that we recognize that too, because one of the questions that our founders struggled with, certainly at the time of the rebellion/revolution, over the course of many years, was we have an enslaved population here. And you have young men like John Lawrence from South Carolina. John Lawrence is an interesting study. He's in his early 20s. He's a lieutenant colonel. He serves on Washington's military family. He's an aide de camp. His father, Henry, is the president of Congress for a period of time during the war. The Lawrence family is South Carolinians who are wealthy. Their entire fortune is vested in the institution of plantation society, which is built on the back of slavery. John Lawrence is a child of the Enlightenment, though, and he is petitioning his father in 1778 to say, what if we put slaves into the army and then granted them their freedom if we win? You have to imagine what motivates him to ask that question. And it is a young, idealistic child of the Enlightenment who is saying, if you look at our Declaration of Independence, and we wanted to look at it literally, what are we doing? How are we fighting for these precepts while we hold a segment of the population in bondage? And the criticism of the revolutionary movement in England is exactly that this is a farce, that this is hypocrisy of the highest level. And Lawrence's father tells him basically, no, we're never going to do that because you're going to incite servile insurrection. The fact that Lawrence is thinking in this way is very interesting to me because it shows you that somebody wants to move progressively and they understand and recognize hypocrisies and blemishes within the model, within the system. Pennsylvania takes action on it. Pennsylvania is the first to take action on it with the Gradual Emancipation Act of 1780. But when I say gradual, glacial is probably a better way to describe it, because if you were born the day before the act took effect, you were enslaved for the rest of your life. And if you were born afterwards, a clock would run for 28 years before you were granted your freedom. It's so gradual that Pennsylvania's last recorded slave dies in 1859. So it takes 79 years for slavery to go away in Pennsylvania. And at that point, we're right on the doorstep of the American Civil War. So what kind of liberty and freedom you're going to find, depending on who you are, or what your background is, or what circumstances you're born into, is going to vary rather radically at this point, at this time period.
It takes a long time to change a heritage.
It takes a long time to change the heritage. It takes a long time to, I think, write narratives or make sure that narratives that were lost, and in some cases, unfortunately, potentially, in some cases, intentionally shrouded, that those see the light of day. And I think that's why living history or public history in general to me it's really important to tell the broadest possible story. You don't manufacture things. You can't manufacture facts where they don't exist, but there are lots of good facts and stories that are out there. And when you try to give as much as you can in a short period of time, not only does it enable a broad demographic of people to hook into that history and then invest, but it enables them to see what these individuals struggled with in the past. And then you could say, a person like me in 1776, I actually don't have it so bad in 2026 maybe. Or what do I need to do to keep the progression moving? Because for me, and I say this to all my groups, if you want to look at the American Revolution as a military conflict, it ends in 1783 and we win. I think you need to look at it on a deeper level. If you look at the American Revolution as a really radical experiment in political and philosophical thought that has the capability, and I think, Ray, the key word is capability, to lead not just to the emancipation of humans, but to the emancipation of humans from the condition we know as suffering. That American Revolution never ends. And when you look at it at that level, it very much becomes not about party politics. It very much becomes about how do I, as a citizen, conduct myself in a manner each and every day that contributes to the positive, and how it impacts my fellow citizens in a positive way. Because every action we take, every decision we make, it impacts far more than us. Some of those actions ripple a bit more than others, but none of us are an island, and none of us are in this alone.
We're all a pebble
Yeah,
making those
yeah,
waves.
yeah.
And community media, w- we ask ourselves, what makes a great community? And we find that a great community is a connected community, one that's connected, and usually connected from based on the passion of their hearts, and who honor the importance of our youth to be mentored, to be helped. But it sounds like the same things occurring back then.
Absolutely. It is. And I think the wise person at any age understands their strengths and understands their limitations. And as we progress in age ourselves and get older, that we don't lose sight of the fact of who we were 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, right? Because younger folks tend to be extremely innovative. They tend to be very good at identifying inconsistencies, identifying problems, coming up with a whole bunch of radical solutions. As we get older, we need to have the patience to mentor them through that, to say, these are great things you've identified. These are some good solutions. Here are some things that might work out and might not work out that I can tell you based on my life experience. But there has to be a social symbiosis that allows that to happen. And that social symbiosis is only possible when the community is strong, because there has to be a trust factor that's built in, right? Where you have to want to mentor a younger person, or where a younger person has every reason to trust that you're going to mentor them in the right direction. It's never going to be perfect. There are always going to be bumps, but I think the more that we work towards that, the better off we're going to be. And much like local or micro level history connects to the macro level history, the way that we form community at the local level or the micro level impacts the macro.
So, one of the concepts is helping each other find their full potential.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that we see is in leadership, the concept of I'm the leader, now I'm directing, rather than I am the leader and I am now unifying, and I'm taking your vision, your skills, your talents, and blending them together.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think growing up I've seen that as how organizations and that worked. You always had I can't say you always.
I think more people in leadership should read von Steuben and less Machiavelli. Honestly, and if you ever look at and that's going to sound like a really weird recommendation, because von Steuben's Blue Book is a training manual. Like, why would I read military drill? Reading it, hold on a second. Reading von Steuben less for the first part of that manual, which is about how does a soldier stand, face right, face left, face about, handle a musket, march in formations. The second half of von Steuben actually is all about leadership responsibility. If you are a lieutenant colonel, a major, a colonel, a sergeant, a corporal, whatever your rank might be in this American Army, what is your responsibility? And it really drills in that leadership is about taking responsibility. It's about taking responsibility for the people who count on you, because you take care of them. It's not about pointing and saying, you go this way. Sometimes that has to happen, yeah, but the work is about building the relationship, building the trust factor, demonstrating that you care. Because when you do that, then you can build effective collaborative relationships. People fall into all different kinds of personality traits. There are going to be some folks who never want to be the leader. There are some folks who want to be the leader just because they want to be in charge and they have that desperate need. There are folks who want to lead and can and should. There are other folks who should lead and they need the confidence boost, right? We need to create systems where good leaders come to the surface naturally because when they're young, they're mentored and they're put into those positions, they're given the opportunities, right? Um, those are the things that we really, really need to do when it comes to leadership because so much of it, and I've based my entire management philosophy and my career on what are the things I'm never going to do. I did that years ago when I took charge of a department. I thought about my professional career and I thought about all the things that I watched happen to people in various places that I thought were terrible. And I started to make a list. And I said, if I ever get into management, here's the list of things I will never do. And I built everything I was going to do off of that list there. And for me, that's been a really helpful way to look at it. But I think at the end of the day, leadership comes down to taking responsibility and taking care of the people under you, putting them in positions where they're going to be able to succeed. And failure's not terrible, right? Especially for our young people, we have to show them that like, it's okay if it doesn't go right. You know, we have to, but then show them how do you take a lesson out of this. Don't let it bog you down. Have your moment of catharsis. Have a good cry if you need to. But then when that's over, how do we move on? Don't get stuck here.
How do you set your goals?
Yep. Yeah, and make them manageable.
So, Ken, what is, how do you make a living? What is your job?
So in my day job, I am the Chief Communications Officer for the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. So I do media relations, public relations, senior management in the nonprofit sector in the Philadelphia region. So that is my day job 5 days a week.
And you've been doing that for how long?
I've been working for the Archdiocese for 22 and a half years, most of my career, full-time.
Is that what you went to college for?
I went to college for communications with a public relations track and for history and Spanish as well.
Which school did you go to?
LaSalle University in Philadelphia. Yeah.
Cool. You seem not only having a great heart for humanity and history, but you seemed very intentional and strategic. And saying these are the things that I don't want to do, compared to the person who gets an opportunity that they've been wishing for and falls into the same rut that other people have done. That's very, I admire you for that.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
In other words, words that you keep on saying is relationships, and how important they are, which is very important for a good society, for a good community. And to show our youth how to function in a community in relationships. I'm going to go off. I just want to say that I could see that in you, and I appreciate that. Live in history.
Mm-hmm.
Gave you the opportunity to experience history in a different manner. Did you ever have a aha moment?
There are small ones and there are big ones.
The small ones are just as great.
Small ones are just as great as the big ones. You know, you'll read a book about the experience of the common soldier in the American Revolution, and you know, if they're talking about something like starting a fire, well, when you get out in the field for a couple of days and you have to start a fire for warmth or to cook, it's the realization of, how do I do this? And when you're trying to start a fire with flint and steel and char cloth or some dry tinder you've picked up off the forest floor, learning that kind of skill is not easy. And you know, if there is somebody who's been practiced at it, sure, they could have it going in a few seconds maybe. But the first time you do it, those things are really hard. Some of the bigger aha moments, and this was a Civil War one, but I think it's a good one. You would read accounts, and you do this all the time when you're looking at military history, of troops marching along roads and then running into the enemy and being confused. And you sort of wonder, well, how could they be so confused? But I distinctly remember being in Virginia in the heat of the summer, and it was a very large Civil War event, you know, probably 10 to 15,000 reenactors at this thing. and our regiment was at the head of the column. And it was the dusty kind of day where it was choking you, right? And dust constantly everywhere in your nostrils and your mouth. And it was just, you heard those accounts of the dust burning you, and I could definitely feel that. And then for whatever reason, I just turned and looked over my shoulder. And I went, oh my God, everybody's the same color. Everybody was coated in a layer of this gray-brown grit dust. And of course you don't recognize friend from foe. So it's these things you read about for years, and then you have these little moments where light bulbs go off, but it's what I like to call experiential archaeology. You know, you just have those kinds of moments there, yeah.
So who are you when you are reenacting?
Usually it's not a specific individual unless I've curated a program where I've researched being somebody and portraying somebody doing first person. There are ways that you can do first person without having to adopt a specific personality. The courts martial are great for that because you don't have to have a ton of background knowledge on an individual. We can try a case in 25 to 30 minutes. A lot of it is working through testimony, and I typically run the military tribunal and am doing a lot of the questioning. But I've done programs portraying Colonel John Glover from Massachusetts for Washington's Crossing. And I have done Lieutenant Colonel Alfred Clifton, who was an interesting character. He was a loyalist from Philadelphia, who was also a Roman Catholic. And if we think about the relationship that the British Empire has with Catholicism, particularly in the 18th century, being able to tell Clifton's story and why Catholic volunteers were even accepted was really powerful. When you do first person and you do it well, if you are portraying a person, a known individual, and that's what you're telling the public, it's really hard. You do 5 to 7 minutes at a clip, and then usually break from that to talk to the public about what they've just heard from you. For me, I think I said this earlier, no matter how we approach living history, whether it's a third person program or we're doing first person in some way, shape, or form, there really is a sanctity to what you're doing. You're taking something sacred off the shelf because it's the historical record, and I think we have an obligation to reflect the historical record as accurately as we possibly can. And then on top of that, you have an individual's life and reputation in your hand. So the general public walks away from their experience with you that day thinking, okay, well, that's exactly what this person was like. It's what they would have said. It's how they would have thought about things at this period in time. So you really always do put a lot of time and effort and thought into how you do any program that touches first person. Not everybody who does living history will do it. Actually, there are very few who are comfortable doing it. And I would rather that the folks who are uncomfortable not try, or they learn. It's mentorship within this hobby, within this part of public history, within this world where you teach somebody that skill. And it really is one that requires a degree of theater background, and it requires a lot of historical research. So you're mixing talents and skills you might have in the modern world to be able to pull this off effectively.
Would you encourage young people or any age to become a reenactor, a living historian?
I would, and I think there's a lot of different ways that you can pursue it. You can work with a lot of local museums and historical societies have that kind of capacity to take on volunteers in that way, or you could join reenacting units and organizations. I think it's a good thing for a lot of reasons. I think if you love the time period and you feel like you want to get a bit of a tangible feel for it, it's good to do. It also builds a community within itself, right? So some of my best friends in the world I've met doing living history work over the years, whether that be a traditional tactical engagement reenactment or some of the folks that I've had the privilege to work with at museums, like the Museum of the American Revolution in Philadelphia. We do a really fun, immersive program there every fall. You meet people who are from all over the country, and they're from all walks of life. And for me, experiencing diversity is a really good thing because I think it broadens your worldview. And I think we're all creatures who are constantly, if we allow it to happen, being educated and being formed, right? So the broader array of people with all these different backgrounds that you can encounter and have some time with them and share a common interest, you probably wouldn't have met otherwise. So it sort of has opened the world in that way to a lot of those people, and the community that we have. It's not a really big one for 18th century. Most of us are clustered along the eastern seaboard, which makes sense.
Mhm.
But if there are a couple thousand of us nationally, that's it.
So you're a strong fraternity,
Yeah,
and it offers you a chance to walk in someone else's shoes.
it does.
Maybe think differently than what you normally would.
Yep.
And if someone has an interest, as you said, look locally.
Yes.
Try to and talking about finding other people to connect to that has the same passion of the heart.
Yes.
I mean, you have to be very passionate to
You
do
have
what
to.
you do.
You have to, and that's key. And that would be my advice to young folks within any community, even if they're not history folks. What are you passionate about?
Me?
Like tell them to go find that passion. Like what are they passionate about? What do they love in life? And it's full circle for me because my mother recognized this passion in my heart. She saw it in my eyes and she encouraged it. Like so it's helping those people find what they're truly passionate about doing, and then how can you use that passion to contribute to the greater good in some way, right?
Right. I took a lot of time. I could keep on going, but I can't. But Gavin, if someone you do a lot, live in history programs, um, Valley Forge National Park, Washington Crossing, Adams County Historic Society. You worked with them. Teaching American History grant program. Um, you worked with that and a number of different things. Lectures, um, podcast appearances, video, um, on and on. Film documentary appearances, modeling for historic artwork. I could go on and on. If someone had an interest in talking to you, how could they get a hold of you?
Best way would be my email, and I can give you that if you can put that up on a lower third or
Yeah,
distribute it.
why don't you give us right now?
Yeah, so it's kgc28pvi@gmail.com. So KG, C as in cat, numeral 2, numeral 8, P as in Peter, V as in victory, I as in igloo.
So if there is something that for the 250th anniversary for the people in this area, something that they should really know, what would that be?
I'm going to be really philosophical, Ray. It doesn't end in 2026, okay? The 250th is going on until 2033, right? And while the main events that you might see were in Boston and Lexington and Concord last year, Philadelphia, Washington's Crossing, Trenton, Princeton, later on this year, I would encourage folks come out. Like really, it's not that far of a trip to get to the Philly area from here. 2 hours, and if you don't want to take the turnpike, take 30. 30 is a beautiful drive. I come out here all the time just because I love it. Come out and experience some of those things, see those places if you never have. There will be major reenacting events in late December for the 10 Crucial Days campaign. So I would encourage folks to do that. But I would also say, they need to hook in with their local historical societies and museums. This is a perfect time to find out what were people in my community experiencing 250 years ago. And in some cases, 1776 might be really different from what people were experiencing in 1780 out in this region. And I know the folks here at New Oxford and in the other surrounding communities are there and want to help share these stories, right? So it's you don't have to go far from home to find the revolution.
No, it's a passion.
Yeah.
We have a great historic society here in New Oxford, Historic Society. And I think something else that I'm going to take with our conversation, Ken, is everybody's a pebble. And when it creates waves when it's thrown in. That's traditional imagery. But you affect people who come after you just by the decisions and the things that you say and write, and sometimes in a big way. And you never know how that's going to be. So when you said the revolution never ended, I think the movement towards humanity being the best it can be to each other is still a process in motion.
It always will be. We'll never get to a point where it's become perfect because we're human. There is inherent human frailty, inherent human weakness, but it is a question of if we can never achieve the perfection, we have to understand that the American Revolution can still be lost. And its fate hangs in my hands, in your hands, in the hands of everybody else that we see every day in this country, because as those pebbles go in, those concentric circles intertwine with each other. Absolutely.
And other people have different interests. Other countries have different interests than we do here, and they're working for their interests, and we're working for ours. So the more I talk to you, the more you just keep saying amazing things.
Thank you. Right.
Are you used to that? I mean,
you're very kind.
Do you sit at home and just amaze everybody? I mean,
I maybe I don't know. I maybe I'll write a book one day. I don't know.
You never did yet, huh?
I haven't. No.
Oh,
I have ideas.
We have to work on that.
I have ideas.
Maybe we could help you here at Community Media.
I have some ideas.
That'd be great.
Awesome.
Thank you for spending time with me here on Community Media Open House. We've had Kenneth, not Kevin, Kenneth Gavin. I said Kevin, and didn't even hear it. Hey, the revolution could still be lost. It can still be lost. It's in your hands. Till we get a chance to bring another awesome person in here like Ken. Stay healthy. You are the best. Take care.